Hello and welcome to the Genius of Knowledge, the third episode of our Genius of series. I'm Hilarie Viener, CEO of Genius 100 Foundation. On behalf of the extraordinary Genius 100 team, founder Rami Kleinman, Global Ambassador Ido Aharoni, and Chief Community Officer Helen Hatzis, thank you so much for making the time to join us, either for the first time or again for this very special Genius 100 Foundation event. We are delighted and honored to see so many Genius 100 visionaries, members of the Genius 100 community, honored guests, and students from so many places around the world. And we want to give a special thank you to series sponsor, BST Canada, and Ala Tanous, founding member of our community, president of Genius 100 Foundation Canada, and global G100 board member, for your generous support. Our organization has a very strict policy which mandates that we remain non-political and non-religious. It is within that context that I must publicly address our deep and universal commitment as humanitarians. As a community, our thoughts and support are with the incredibly brave people of the Ukraine and their truly remarkable leader, President Zelensky. With every passing moment, we hope for safety and peace for them and for the sovereignty of their country. Today's episode marks a very special honor for us, as this episode was developed in partnership with the magnificent Kate Robinson, who you'll meet in a minute, of Imagine If and the newly formed Sir Ken Robinson Institute. And we are, right now, proudly announcing the first ever Genius 100 Legacy Partnership with Kate, We Imagine If, and the SKR Institute to continue the globally significant work of Genius 100 visionary Sir Ken Robinson. Just this past Tuesday, March 1st, her book, Imagine If, Creating a Future for Us All, which includes the manifesto of her late father, Sir Ken Robinson's work, became available, just in time for the launch of this year's Imagine If Festival, which this event is part of. My copy is arriving today and I can't wait to read it. The Genius of series exemplifies that we as an organization are inspired by Einstein to bring together accomplished, compassionate minds to reimagine the future and improve our world. Each month, the Genius of will highlight one or more of our illustrious world-renowned G100 visionaries. This brilliant group is comprised of global leaders, activists, innovators, and influencers, of which 16 are Nobel laureates, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Which brings me to today's episode, featuring an absolutely phenomenal group of global citizens, working separately but toward the same goal of creating solutions, inspiration, access, and action. On that note, here's the rundown, and I'll try to introduce them briefly. G100 visionary Dr. Obiageli of Nigeria, Dr. Sima Samar of Afghanistan, and Maggie MacDonnell of Canada, and Kate Robinson of the UK, and the one and only Cordell Carter, who is not only my friend, but the executive director of Aspen Institute's Socrates program, founding director of Project on Belonging, and founder of the Festival of the Diaspora Conference. Just a quick note on that, we at Genius were proudly in on the ground floor with the inaugural Festival of the Diaspora last week in San Juan. And I had the great fortune of being able to participate and present the brand new Genius 100 Future of Education report. I encourage everyone here to stay tuned to the Festival of the Diaspora space. Cordell and his team are setting the stage for real and positive change. Now back to the schedule. Cordell will lead a panel discussion covering how COVID has disrupted school systems worldwide, what does a future of education look like, and how we can ensure that it's equitable for everyone, how our global education systems are dealing with the rapid rise in student mental health issues, the evolving role of the teacher, access, bias, and truth in the digital age, and adaptation to constant disruption. And here's where you come in. We'll be fielding questions from the audience at the conclusion of the conversation. So please don't forget to submit questions via the Q&A option located within your Zoom panel. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce not only Cordell, but our awe-inspiring panel. Dr. Obi Ezekwesili of Nigeria is a professor at Yale, Minister of Education that led the restructuring and refocusing of the education ministry for the attainment of education for all in her country, was Vice President of the World Bank for the Africa region. She's a co-chair of the World Economic Forum for Africa, founder of Bring Back Our Girls campaign, and a 2019 presidential candidate for Nigeria. Dr. Sima Samar of Afghanistan is the founder of Garshad University in Kabul, Afghanistan, for women, poor, and marginalized students, founder of the Shahuda Organization and Shahuda Clinics, former chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, the first Minister of Women's Affairs in her country, one of the only 2 women in that transition government. She's received numerous international awards for human rights and democracy, including the Global Leader for Tomorrow from the World Economic Forum, Voices of Courage Award from the Women's Commission for Refugee Women and Children, the Profile and Courage Award, and the Mother Teresa Award for Social Justice. And we have Maggie MacDonnell of Canada, a Canadian educator, development practitioner, and winner of the 2017 Global Teacher Prize. Maggie teaches in the Canadian Arctic, where temperatures are often sub-zero. She's vastly improved the lives of students and continues to strive to balance social inequality. And we have Kate, who we introduced a bit earlier. And now, Cordell, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Hilarie. And it was great to see you last week in Puerto Rico. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an incredible panel today. You've heard their amazing bios. I stand in awe of these amazing women on International Women's Month. So this is very apt. And we're going to talk about what's been on our minds for the last 2.5, going on 3 years. And that is, of course, the global pandemic we know as COVID-19 and its impact on education and all of the facets of our lives. So let's jump right in, shall we? So we know that COVID has disrupted school systems worldwide, some differently. I mean, if you're privileged, like my children here in the DC metro area, they just got to see mom and dad more. If you're in a different part of the world or a different part of the country, you've had a very, very different experience. And so the first question to this panel is, what does the future of education look like, all things considered? And how can we ensure that it is an equitable experience for everyone? Let's go with Sima for this first question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be part of this panel. First of all, I would like to just share my solidarity with the people in Ukraine. And I have to say, unfortunately, they are repeating the same mistake as they did in Afghanistan, and a new war and new displacement and all these things, which all, of course, disturb the education system as well in the country. I think that there's a different environment and situation in my country, unfortunately. Not only the education system disturbed by COVID, but it's also disturbed by the political crisis that we have in the country, an economical crisis. All these 3 crises, COVID crisis, a political crisis, and economical crisis, disturb the education system. And I do hope that they put the education system as the priority to rebuild the education system in the country. I believe education is key to change the mentality and to bring a country to a sustainable development and peace. And unfortunately, we saw that that is not happening in my country. And I see the lack of attention to education or to formal good quality education. We end up with the people like Taliban, and I'm sure that my sister from Nigeria will, also has an impact from that kind of education in her country. So our environment is quite difficult, and I can't really imagine now what will be the future, but I do hope that everybody in the future would have access to good quality of education. And that is for safety of all of us and for respect for the human dignity.
Thank you so much. Let's go to our resident educator here, and Ms. MacDonnell.
Thank you so much. That's a great question, and I'm really torn. I'm typically an optimist and pretty hopeful, but I'm going to tell you what a lot of my fears are. Prior to COVID, we were short globally about 70 million teachers. Okay, 70% of that in sub-Saharan Africa already. So 70 million teachers we needed to recruit. Okay, now since COVID, teachers have been burnt out. They've been struggling. There's so much research, especially coming out of the States, of surveys done by unions, by other bodies, to show that teachers are really now in high numbers considering leaving the profession, leaving it early, etc. So we're going to have a crisis of actual human teachers in the classroom if we don't start addressing this, if we don't start looking at compensation, if we also don't start looking at sort of how teachers are recognized and valued within their communities, within the public space. And I would be very cautious too of quick ed tech solutions that might come in, especially in the Western context, where we might think, okay, well, we don't have, enough warm teaching bodies to be leading these classrooms, so we're going to subsidize or replace that with these sort of quick ed tech solutions that are out there, and then you could end up with a situation where class sizes are increasing. You might have a less highly trained teacher in that context, maybe more someone to facilitate, a pre-developed ed tech curriculum that's being delivered, through an app that kids are engaging with. So I think it really could flip into some pretty dangerous territory. I'm very much of the belief that teachers are bottlenecks in that system, and we have to invest in them, help more with professional development, because I think education is so relational, and I love ed tech solutions that complement a teacher, but not ones that literally, try to replace a teacher. So those are some of my initial thoughts that I'll put out there.
Thank you. Kate.
Yes, hi everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I think it's a brilliant question, and I wouldn't dare to speak to parts of the world like Afghanistan, or the ones that Obi are experiencing and what's going on in Ukraine. But certainly, what I can share is that of the the children, like your children, Cordell, or like my children, or sort of just the sort of general average experience of the child. Certainly here in the UK, where I feel like there was possibly an opportunity, because we'd hit pause in all of our systems, to sort of, reset our course and start anew. Certainly over here, all the evidence seems on a systemic level that we're actually just going to sort of do a U-turn and go back the way we've come, but with, more aggression and more emphasis on the accelerator. I think a big part of what we need to do is to acknowledge that, yes, children have missed out a lot of time in traditional schooling. They've all had different experiences with it, but what each and every child, and I can speak to my children in this, in everywhere, is it's been very difficult for them. So yes, while, we talk about these lost years of education and making up for what they've lost in school, I think it's more of an imperative that we stop and realize the toll it's had on their mental health, the mental health crisis that we're seeing in young people, and address, don't try and carry on as normal as if that 2 years didn't happen, as if it was just a blip and we'll pick up where we left off, but actually stop and acknowledge that the pandemic is having a very real effect on children around the world, regardless of the circumstance. And certainly, if their situation was bad before they went into the pandemic, it was infinitely worse because of it. So I kind of agree with you. I would like to be more of an optimist on this. And I think it actually comes down to individual schools, individuals, families, individual teachers to do what they can to make up for where systems in general seem to be hell-bent on going backwards rather than forwards.
Thank you for bringing up the mental health issue, and we're going to dig into that. But first, I want to hear from Obi on her prescription for a more equitable future of education for all.
So, Cordell, thank you so much, and hello to my dear sisters from across the world. Can you hear me? Yes. Excellent. So, we were already dealing with the inequities and the inequalities even before COVID. So what COVID has done is to entrench those inequalities and inequities even deeper. And that definitely says something about us always navel gazing until the problem gets worse. That has been the way that we have approached problems in the world in the last couple of decades, unlike times when the multilateral system at least functioned relatively okay. We now know that it is entirely broken. And because it is broken, we cannot solve public bads, global public bads. We can take advantage of global public goods. And so the first thing that I would say is we do need to redesign the existing multilateral system. It isn't working. It wasn't working. It has worsened now. We're failing too many children, and frankly speaking, the ones that should not be failed. The children of the poor are left behind even more than ever before. And there's no way we're going to tackle poverty by leaving them further behind than we originally left them. So I think that on the optimistic side of things, I would say that the opportunity we have to redesign, I'm not talking about tinkering on the margins. I'm saying let's actually reimagine the world. Imagination is better than intelligence. We were told that by Einstein. Let's listen to someone who knows or who knew what he was saying. We need to reimagine our world, and it is through education that we can do that. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Kate brought up a very important question, or point I should say, about mental health and the impact of the last 2 years on children all over the world. Now we know in the Western world, there was some advantages that perhaps some other places do not have. I'm thinking specifically of Maggie's students in the Arctic. Well, digital divide is normal. Where remoteness is the norm. It's just a very different space. But our kids have missed the ritual. They didn't have prom. They didn't have homecoming. They didn't have football games. The camaraderie and the social networking, just being in space with other people. I wonder, and we'll start here with Maggie, if she could talk about what she's seeing in terms of the mental health damage, if you will, or perhaps the trauma that kids have experienced over the last 2 years and what that portends for the future.
Thank you so much. And I was so happy Kate brought it up. I work in environments that are heavily shaped by trauma, intergenerational trauma, legacies of like colonial oppression, et cetera. And that is the #1 issue facing me as a teacher every time I come into that classroom. And as a teacher in the West, what has driven me crazy during COVID is all of this talk on learning loss, learning loss, learning loss, you know, and we're funding tax money into researching it and publishing data and all of that. And we're never talking about wellness loss, okay? And if we actually focused on wellness, all of that other learning would take place, okay? So if we created safe, welcoming, loving environments for kids, acknowledge their trauma, help them heal through those things, I guarantee you, in almost every situation I've been in, that child will blossom, you know, and they will excel academically or however it is that they're supposed to blossom in this world. So I think there needs to be so much more attention on mental health. In the first part of the crisis here in Canada, we had, in the first lockdown, I should say, of COVID, we had 400% increases in calls to our suicide prevention lines. If we look at data coming from our stores that sell alcohol, beer, cannabis, et cetera, there was over a 40% increase in sales, you know, coming from those places. And again, we know that those products are now being consumed in the home with kids around. Parents were facing unemployment, you know, domestic violence has gone up. And a lot of this has been contained within the domestic space. So kids are witnessing all of this, they're bearing that. So we really need to think as we open up schools again or transform or imagine new schools, why don't we really imagine new wellness programs that come in with them, whether that's a yoga teacher in residence, whether it's a musician in residence, whether we think of extracurriculars that so often are what attract kids to come to school, not being extra, but being core to the curriculum, you know? So those are some of my initial thoughts when that idea comes to my head.
And if I may, Maggie, are you concerned that this is yet another burden for already overworked teachers?
Absolutely.
That will be uncompensated, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it could just be, okay, teachers, we're going to call it learning loss, not a wellness loss. So we're going to misname it, mislabel it. We're going to tell you to buckle down, hurry up with your already, you're not quite paid enough. Your resources are already stretched. You're covering classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. You're also dealing with your own wellness, because teachers have been in a burnt out profession for the last 2-3 years at least, you know, and now figure it all out without necessarily bringing in more resources, you know, and bringing in more bodies to help them in that context, you know. I think that's so important. And then if we just double down on teachers more, I think eventually we're going to find, yeah, they do have a breaking point. And we've seen that with COVID, when these surveys are being done. And you know, I'm reading surveys that show 70% of teachers in some American states are seriously considering leaving the profession, right? Those are critical mass numbers, right?
Yes, thank you so much. Sima, I know that you've done much with young women in Afghanistan. I wonder if you can speak to some of the trauma that has been experienced. It's probably layered on top of other trauma, and how that impacts their educational experience.
Well, I think the COVID impact was really bad in Afghanistan, as I said before, that just add to other economical crises and issues in the country. And then I would say that the mental impact of the COVID was not only on the children. It has had a lot of impact within everybody, on everyone in the family. One of the things that had a very, very negative impact in our situation was that the economical situation of the country and the increase on violence against the women in the families. Because we lost a lot of people during the war, and then the woman is actually the breadwinner of the family, and then they were not able to do to work and have any kind of income. At least in these countries, there's a social security, so they can get something from somewhere, but this does not exist in Afghanistan. So the impact of poverty and violence within the country, and the constant fear of Taliban and suicide attacks and losing all those things. I mean, you heard about the schoolgirls, which was attacked last year in May. All these has very, very negative impact on the mental health of women. And in our case, unfortunately, since last August, none of the teachers has been paid. I mean, you heard about the Taliban who were saying that the girls from 7th grade to 12th grade and the girls in the universities cannot come, although they allow the private universities, but the overall fare has a lot of impact on the students. For example, in the university that I run, where I started not running anymore myself, 1/3 of the girls came back to the classes because of the problem and the economical problem. They cannot pay, and they cannot even cover their transportation costs. And then lack of security. They have fear from Taliban that that they are coming and checking the class, and they order that this classes between the boys and girls should be separate, and even the door they use should be separate. So we have very, very difficult mental situation for our people, and nobody speaks about it. And there's no plan, no program for it, because currently people are dying from hunger. I mean, you hear the news that 1 million children are in danger of losing their life, and the malnutrition increased a lot. They're selling their daughters in order to feed the rest of the family. So education is something more luxury for the people. And this has a very, very negative impact and overall situation in Afghanistan and on the education, actually, on the education system. And we have the Minister of Higher Education who says that we don't need the degrees. The country run by the madrasa graduated, all the religious, even not educated properly, half educated, or hardly some of them are able to read and write. So we have very, very difficult situation compared to the other countries. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Obi, you've been part of the redesign of a nation's education system. How does mental health play into that?
I think it plays a lot. Unfortunately, what you find is that we always designed education as though it were a silo. Education is not supposed to be left to bureaucrats, but that's what happened. After a while, something that important for society became, something that just a bunch of fellows in the Ministry of Education cared about and did something about. And the rest of society was missing. So part of what began to happen was that it tunnel visioned. Education essentially just burrowed into the tunnel and left out many other things. And that's, for example, its connection to the emotional well-being of the individual who is within that space of learning. When I was Minister of Education, one of the things I did in response to this point that I am making is that I decided that myself and the Minister of Health would have more interactions because we intersected at many levels, but we were no longer seeing that. Everyone was busy with their sector. And yet we don't live life in sectors. We just simply live life. So, that whole idea of making education integrated so that we're catching the things that are slipping off, the things that are, nobody's paying attention to because it's not their daily routine activities. That's so important. And that's why I think that this whole idea of COVID being a terrible thing, and the only thing we can do is figure out what little thing has it brought for us. And I would say that it's the opportunity to reimagine, to just reimagine everything. I frankly don't like people who keep talking about post-COVID recovery. What are you recovering to? You're recovering to a past that was not good enough. I want to recover to that. It wasn't good enough. So let's not do that. Let's use this as an opportunity to just get back to the design table and to reimagine what our world could look like. I don't see how it is that we make, providing mental care services in school systems as though it were going to Mars. Elon Musk has shown us that we can even, imagine that and get going, right? So why are we the basic things, like what Maggie was saying? What does it cost the world to think of the value of teachers? Our society is in crisis because education is in crisis. Education is in crisis because the role of the teacher is suddenly not what it used to be. How difficult is this for us to understand? We got to do something about our politics. Our politics is dumbing down everything about the world.
Well, no argument with me on the dumbing effect of politics, but I do want to give 2 questions to Kate as she'll kick off the next round. I wanted to finish off on mental health, but from the perspective of a parent. She started us on this route. And I'm just, I know my observations from my daughter. She's a bit older, so it's, I frankly think she enjoyed the experience of being home every day for a year and a half. And in the French system here in the US, they were really on top of it in terms of digital, but I speak from a position of privilege. And so I was just very interested in Kate's experience with her children's mental health, perhaps with other parents. And then to Obi and Maggie's point, what do you say about this opportunity to really shift a paradigm on the way we educate young people?
Absolutely. So I have an 8-year-old stepson and a 3-year-old daughter. And so she turned 2 just after the pandemic started. And I at first sort of thought she'd be fine because she was, she wasn't school age, she was young. And it would probably have a bigger effect on my stepson. But actually what happened, they have very different experiences, but on top of, you mentioned about missing prom and all these rituals and things like that, which is absolutely true. And it's, a loss of identity for children. But on top of that, there was the fear of going outside. There was a constant broadcast that seeing other people, seeing your family wasn't safe, that you could kill your grandmother, that if your parents got sick, they might die, that you might die. This constant, and like kids are growing up in an era now where they have more access to information than any generation before them, and very little support for how they process that information. And there was this constant, parents watching the news in the background or things popping up on social media that how do you make sense of what you're reading that actually just, visiting your grandma on Mother's Day might actually kill her. And that would be your fault because maybe you went to school that day. We didn't close schools quite as much over here as they did in other parts of the world. So there's that aspect of it that for my daughter who was 2 and is now, she's in nursery and she's about to start school, has taken quite a bit of undoing, that yes, it wasn't safe to go up to strangers before. I mean, it's never safe to go up to strangers, you know what I mean? But it wasn't safe to go up, to visit people then, but it is now. And it's not that strangers or other people are inherently bad or dangerous or that school is a bad place. So that was really difficult. And then for our 8-year-old who was 6, his whole experience of school, he started in reception, which is kindergarten over here. He's now in year 3, which is the equivalent of 2nd grade. So his whole school experience has been in the pandemic and trying to make sense of it and trying to explain and talk to him about it. And they, like yours, Cordell, they're in a position of privilege with parents who are very happy to sit down and talk to them about it. But for the children who had a difficult home life or who have, even on top of everything else that was going on, just the fear of other people, it's so alien. We're a social species. We depend upon whether we like to think so or not. And in the West, we do a terrible job of it, but we depend upon other people to help our cultures thrive. So I think we're going to be seeing the repercussions of it for a lot longer than we initially thought, because it is even the kids who weren't school age to begin with. Now, they're so malleable. And we have to, to your point, Maggie, we have to do better at giving them resources to explain what's happening rather than just being like, oh, well, the pandemic's over. Over here in the UK, there are no restrictions anymore. So if you test positive for COVID, you can still go to school. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying for us. It's terrifying for children because if they go and then they bring it back and you have an immunosuppressed parent. So that's my answer. I think, there are amazing programs out there that are doing. And I'm always keen, Obi, you talk about the optimism. And I am so keen always to talk about the fact that there are incredible people doing incredible things on a daily basis to try and make a positive difference in the world. And this really was their time to shine. So hope isn't totally gone, but it is, if you look at it, to your point about politics dumbing things down, we talk a lot over here. It's something that my father talked about, that, revolutions don't happen in governments. Education isn't what happens behind the closed doors of politics. It's what happens every single day in the classroom. And it's that awful time, Maggie, like you said, teachers are so burnt out. They were burnt out before, there were problems before. And now we just need more, but now on top of everything else, you have to be part-time therapist and you have to be compensating without any support yourself. So it's, but I'll segue off that dismal bit into the optimism, maybe you said, of creating a paradigm shift. We did stop everything. And people say about how this affected the whole world and we all went through this together. And I'm not sure that's true, because just even this panel, the different circumstances, different countries and different families went through. We were all in the same storm and all of us in different boats within it. But if there was ever an opportunity to make a paradigm shift, surely this was it. Surely it is. What kind of a world do we want to be stepping back into? Surely this is the time that we don't want to go back. We don't want to get back to where we were before. And we're seeing that more in businesses. People are saying they want flexible working. We're trialing 4-day working weeks here in the UK. It just doesn't seem so far to be translating into education. But surely, if there was ever a moment to globally come together and think we have to rethink this, we have to reimagine our world, and we can, because we created it in the first place. The human world is designed as much out of our minds as it is the physical environment. These systems are human systems. So it's, if not us, who? There's no one else to change the system. Then now is that moment of opportunity.
Dare I say that Kate is the father's daughter?
Indeed.
It was a great
indeed.
privilege to be.
Yes. So, ladies, we have 10 minutes left, and I'm going to allot 3 minutes to each of you all to answer the following question from your individual perspective. And we're going to start with Sima. And the perspective, I should say, the question I want you to fixate on is following. You are now queen of the world of education, and you've been tasked with reimagining the paradigm. What are the 2 things you would do different? So Sima, then we go to Obi, and we're going to end with Maggie.
Well, thank you. It's a very, very important question. One, I think I would facilitate access to education for everyone. Number 2, I think I would really work on the curriculum and training teachers, because as Maggie said, that we need to acknowledge the teacher or teaching business, because that is really something that put the foundation for any future structure you want. So, and the teacher's behavior is really the second important after the family. So if teachers are in good mood and have less mental problem, as we all have, unfortunately, not in my case in Afghanistan, all of them has really, really difficult life and difficult situation. Including that you get out, you don't know if somebody comes because you have a blue scarf, then they will beat you up why you don't have a black one. So to build the future of the country, we have to work on that. And then inclusivity, of course, include parents, include the students, include the teachers, particularly on the building the system, and then let facilitate education for everyone. And in our case, actually, it is, according to our previous constitution, it is compulsory, but we were not able to really facilitate to having school in every corner. We had, the Ministry of Education was saying that they have 9 million children in school, but maybe 8 million students in the school, or 7 million. Because of the corruption, it was not really qualified, committed teacher, because one is qualification, the other side of the actual work is how committed they are to their job and to teaching and facilitate learning for their students. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to sum it up for the people that may have some questions. Her 4 points were access for all, updated curriculum, well-being of teachers, and inclusivity. Thank you so much, Sima. Obi, 3 minutes.
So number 1, I'll piggyback on Sima's number 1, which was about access, and layer on access, actual learning. Many children that have access and learning. The latest report into that problem finds that on my continent, 9 out of every 10 children under the age of 10 cannot actually read nor write at the proficiency level of their peers in the rest of the world. 9 out of every 10. They can't even do mathematical operation of that age. So foundational literacy and numeracy is in crisis. I will fix it. I will just fix it, because once the foundation is weak, there is no way the rest of the house would stand. So every problem that we have with education is coming from a tattered, disrepute, or a foundation that is in disrepair. So I'll do that. The second thing that I'll do is I would enhance the quality of teachers. I would enhance the quality of teachers by ensuring that I would take all the teachers away. I'll just say to them, we have 1 year of you resting and just learning in an environment where you feel like your body, your soul, your spirit are coming back together in harmony. I think most teachers are exhausted, are barely even just. They are almost like doing this now. Initially people became teachers because they loved teaching. It's a vocation. It was a vocation. Now it's a job to keep body and soul together. And that's so sad because we all remember the impact that teachers had in our lives. And that was when teaching was a vocation. I'll take teachers out of the classroom and just give them some really quality time and an upgrading of their skills and bringing back their enthusiasm. I believe that the enthusiasm of teachers matter a lot for children because it makes children want to learn in the classroom. Number 3 thing that I would do is that I would shut down all the ministries of education. Yeah, close them down. And then I would invite the young people and some of the children who can, frankly, be as imaginative, if not more imaginative than the adults. And I would say to them, design the system that you want to see that would regulate the issues of policies in education. How do you want it to be? Let them just, like a tabula rasa. These children, for goodness sake, we're busy superintending the lives of the children. That some of us are not going to be here in the next 30 years. And yet we're running education based on our outmoded. Am I speaking the right English? What is it? Yeah, it's like anachronistic ideas. So we bring in museum thoughts into the lives of children who are busy thinking of a different life. The children who are going to explain Starlink to me while I listen, all right? Now I'm going to be doing policy for them. No, change it around. Children, young people, sit at this table. Imagine the education that you want to see in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And you know what? I'll make sure that equal representation of the boys and the girls would happen at that imagination design table, okay? And finally, I would make sure that these my favorite ladies are in the room because they get it, right? So even though Sima and Kate and Maggie and myself, we belong to a certain generation, there is something of the heart that speaks to issues. And when the heart is speaking to an issue where the head understands that issue, those are the kinds of persons you want for intergenerational conversation, because we do need intergenerational conversation around education. Those are my points.
Great, thank you. I just want to quickly summarize. So in addition to access, I would say access with fidelity. So numeracy, literacy, ramping up our efforts on foundational skills, and what I deem a spiritual and intellectual revival for the teacher corps. They need some time to just refresh and remember that why they got into the profession rather than what the profession has become. And then shutter all the ministries of education. I'll leave that one right there. And replace them, utilize the student voice, the people that will exist in the future, let them design it. Thank you so much for that. And last but certainly not least, our subject matter expert on teaching, Canada's former Teacher of the Year, Maggie. You have the floor.
Thank you. I would be inspired by Sunny Barkey and his quote that said, no matter the question, education is the answer. So if education is the answer, we need to look at our GDPs, and we've got to put a big piece of the pie into education. I don't know what that number is right now, but I think it has to be a significant piece of the pie, and that needs to be reflected in across the globe. All countries need to be stepping up. The reason why we look at those African students who maybe are 9 out of 10 compared to Canadian students in terms of their reading rates, etc. We know it has a lot to do with the amount of money that's being funded into their system, right? That you follow the dollar and you'll understand what the issue is there. So GDP needs to be one of the number one things we look at. And secondly, I would design schools so that they are based upon heart, head, and hands. And by that, I mean heart, because school should be about empathy, teaching empathy and compassion, okay? Head, I mean critical thinking, understanding power structures, unlearning, relearning. And by hands, I mean action, I mean doing. I wish I could take the word education and turn it into edu-action. And so that every time a student is learning, within their schools, and let's break down those school walls as much as we can, so that their learning becomes alive in the community, project-based learning, community partnerships, collaboration. And that will also assure that our education is so contextual. So those would be, and of course I'd bring in Obi to be my PR lady, because when she talks, everybody listens.
Great. So just to summarize,
Kathy, I won't even take a salary.
hey, free work, take that one. But to summarize Maggie's suggestions, more investment in education. I'm reminded of the saying that budgets are moral expressions of the people who created them. And so if we care about these issues and we know it's important, it'll show up in our budgets. If it's not showing up, we have to really question what we care about. School design with heart, head, and hand and head, changing the notion from education to edu-action. I like that. And of course, Obi spreading this gospel on your behalf around the world. I really appreciate this. We have a couple of questions here, and I know some people have to go, but I'll just read it out and whoever's here can start answering. Teaching has gone on to another stage. Distant teaching is possible. Wouldn't it be great to understand how we may change it from here on for the good? Hobbies and projects have shown that you can teach in emotion rather than only in data. So let me just summarize that question. Distant teaching, this idea of using technology to deliver curriculum, not as a replacement, or maybe perhaps as additive to what's going on. What are your thoughts on using more technology in education?
I'll jump in. I think so many teachers have upskilled during COVID and have become so much more comfortable online, and that's amazing. They're Zoom experts, and wonderful things that I think can unfold from that are just global classroom partnerships. Where I could have students in the Canadian Arctic tapping into students in Nigeria. But to address those, we also have to remember that there's still a big digital divide in this world. So even as a Canadian, I teach it, I've largely taught in the Canadian Arctic. Our schools were shut down. Some of our schools and villages were shut down for the last 6 months because here in Canada, we don't have the bandwidth, okay? So we have to remain cognizant about the bandwidth as well as the devices and who's paying for the data. But those are all exciting, and I think teachers will leap at those opportunities.
Great, thank you, Kate.
Yeah, I have a very quick answer to this one, which is I think, technology is anything that extends our capabilities. So whether that's mental or physical, and certainly, we wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't have got through globally, the global collaboration that we've seen in the past 2.5 years would not exist without it. So I have a lot of hope in what technology makes available for us. I also, I didn't get to be Queen of Education, Cordell. But if I had been Queen of Education and could have changed anything, I would have made it more human. And I think we need to, yes, technology offers us vital opportunities to do things we couldn't before. But I would love to see humanity go back into education, to remember that children and young people are people, that teachers are people, that everything is human within this system. And my fear is if we put too much dependence on technology to get us out of the situation we're in, we'll actually end up digging the hole bigger. So it's about what we're using it for, and making, I also think, as you know, we as a species, we have a hard time dealing in moderation. It's either we love technology and solve everything, or we hate it and we mustn't let kids anywhere near it. And I think there is there's room to incorporate everything into it. But to echo Maggie, it's also a point of privilege just to even be able to have the discussion around it. It doesn't solve a problem if people have no access to it.
Certainly. Last word from Obi.
I think Obi left.
Yeah, great.
Oh, I am here.
Oh no, she didn't.
Okay,
Hi, Obi.
great.
Yeah.
Last word.
So I thought I should, since it's the last one, I would say that we need to be balanced. We must not say technology does not have a role. Technology has a role, and we just need to be balanced. Human beings were created to be social animals. And so the social part of it must not get lost because of technology. However, the technology part of it must not make us lose our being. Our human beingness, together with technology, can really make great outputs and outcomes. And so let's keep using them together.
Great. Well, I thank you all so much. What a way to kick off Women's History Month. I turn the floor back over to Hilarie.
Well, thank you, Cordell, and everyone. This was incredible. I was just going to say the same thing. What a way to celebrate International Women's Month. I mean, this is incredible. And we so appreciate everyone's commentary and thoughts. And I'm sure if everyone who is on the call has more questions, please just email them to us at Genius and we'll get in touch with our wonderful panelists and get you some more answers to whatever you'd like to speak about on this topic. So in addition to thanking everyone, I wanted to make sure to thank Helen Hatsis, our Chief Community Officer, who makes this engine run. She works behind the scenes tirelessly every single day to make everything happen and look perfect on the outside. And we also want to thank our corporate sponsor again, BST Canada, for your commitment to the Genius of series. And our generous supporters. Without your commitment to us, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. If you like our programming and want to think about donating to Genius, please go on our website and click the donate button. We'd be happy to hear from you. And we have some terrific news to share as we wrap up today. One is our 2022 Genius 100 Visionary was announced in kind of, covert at Cordell's conference last week, but we're making the official announcement on March 14th, Einstein's birthday. So please stay tuned for that. It's a very big and wonderful announcement that's happening. So, and also later in this month, from March 17th to the 22nd, G100 will be in Israel. As of this morning, we will be making our plans to be in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. From Jerusalem, we'll be making a big announcement for the future of our education and a commitment to some programming out of Jerusalem that we will be a big part of. So stay tuned for that. The next Genius 100 community meeting will be in April. We'll be sending around invitations to that to everyone who's been on this call, and of course the Genius 100 Visionaries and panel for today. During that community meeting, we will be presenting the G100 Future of Education report and also announcing our new G100 campaigns. The Genius 100 Global Inspiration New York Festival Advertising Awards is ongoing, so stay tuned for that space as well. You can look at the New York Festival Advertising Awards website, keep up with what's happening there. And for more information on anything we've talked about today, please go to our website. Don't forget to join our mailing list if you're not already on it, or just be in touch with Helen or myself for any other information. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye.